takes a real trust and a conviction to walk into a meeting, and rather than just jumping into high gear, giving it a moment of silence or waiting for the other to speak, it takes a certain trust that it actually is more productive.
Welcome to Changing Conversations. This is a podcast where we bring you insight on how you can harness the power of conversation to make change happen. And we hope that through the time that we spend together here, you can leave with an idea or a thought that you can use in your next conversation. Today, we have Eli Buren with us. My name's Katrina, and this is Steve. And we'll be talking about choosing the way that you show up in conversation. And rather than do a long introduction, I know, Steve, you know Eli, or you've at least had encounters before. So what do we need to know about Eli in the context of this conversation?
For me, Eli is embodiment, and that is inspiring me to dare to, be in my body when I'm in life. So that's what you have been inspiring me on for more than 20 years. And I hope more people will have that gift during these 25 minutes.
So welcome, Eli.
Thank you for that warm welcome, that generous.
Well, thank you. I think it should be said that we've actually done something special before we have started this podcast, which was we had a tea ceremony. And I think it bears mentioning because in terms of choosing the way that you show up in conversation, I think this was kind of an interesting example of, how you might contextualize the beginning of a conversation. So what does it mean to be present in conversation? What do you say?
On the most fundamental level of that is that somebody is home in the conversation, in their experience of their breath, their body, their awareness. So when we're present, we're with the person in front of us, with the situation. We're truly in the room rather than distracted and elsewhere, flying in the past and the future.
During the tea ceremony, you actually mentioned this Japanese term, and I think it adds to this description you just gave to us. Would you mind saying it again? What was it?
Ichigo, Ichii. And I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correct either, but it's something like that.
Yeah. So what does that mean?
So I've been told that Ichigo is meaning an interval of time, the beginning of a conversation to the end of a conversation, the beginning of this podcast to the end, an interval that will never be repeated again in the exact same way. And then Ichii is an assembly of people or a gathering that has its uniqueness, that the three of us, I hope, will gather again in the future, but it will never be the same as it is right now. So it's pointing our attention towards striving to be as present as we possibly can in each moment, because they're fleeting and it won't be repeated.
So there's an element of both in the tea ceremony, but also in what you're just saying. There's something about actually showing up and honoring the fact that we are, in whatever conversation we might be in, we are creating something that's unique. And I can't help mentioning that because the context we're very often in is in meetings, right? In organizations. And my own experience is that very often there's very little honoring of that, and people show up and we're not really there. So I'd like to hear you maybe give some advice as to how can I be there more? What does that mean? Because I'm there, right? But physically I'm there, I would claim. But then again,
Right. Yes. Often I'll say, is everybody here? And often they're not. The body is there. And so I like that question. And in all honesty, that's something that I continue to explore and practice myself. I don't think we don't get to an end where we're here all the time. It's a continual process as we age, as things change, to continue to stay present as much as possible. And life circumstances presents us with opportunities that make that difficult. And there's that play between our life circumstance and our desire to fully be here. So to answer your question, what I would suggest is that it takes a personal practice at the very base level. So let's start there, because we are all busy, whether it's a meeting, whether it's a family, and the children need attention. There's always something calling for our attention. So in those moments, often we don't have the time to slow down and have the same level of presence we had here in this tea ceremony. However, if we've been doing that kind of a practice, at least for 10, 20 minutes, an hour, a day, or a few times a week, we start to build a reservoir or a muscle that gives us the capacity to stay present even when it's chaotic, even when there's a deadline, somewhere to go, something that needs to happen now. We may speed up. I might start speaking faster, moving faster, but there's an underlying note within me that knows what depth and stillness and relaxation is. And I don't sacrifice that unless I'm doing it consciously, which I do sometimes.
And why do you think it is that so few of us in these encounters, in these conversations, have the capacity or I would even say courage to be there? Because there's a certain level of, you have to bring a certain level of vulnerability into this. I mean, and sometimes when you do that, you also, at least I also sense a part of me that doesn't want that doesn't really want that presence. It's easier to be shallow. It's easier to be high paced. It's easier not to check in for real. And there's a part of me that want to jump all that tea ceremony, spiritual BS and just get to it.
Right.
And the problem is that we can only go so far, I guess.
Can I just ask, how does that look for you when you are in, let's say, a meeting?
Yeah.
From meeting to meeting, I know you have a lot in a day.
For me, it's you go into a meeting and you literally feel that we are not really here, and therefore the sensation I have is we can only go so far in this conversation because we're not really here.
So then you don't commit even more because you're like, well, you're not really here, so I won't really be here.
And then for me, what is challenging is, say that I might have a language for that or a consciousness around this, but if I'm meeting people that don't, it can be a little bit invasive to say, hey guys, let's do a check-in. Let's do a 10-minute tea ceremony before we get going. That's kind of awkward. You don't do that.
Impossible.
Impossible. Yeah. So you need some kind of a practice to apply in those situations where you bring some level of consciousness or embodiment in. How do I do that?
Well, look, you can't impose a lot of things, and you wouldn't want to, because everyone is interested in what they are in. Of course, if it's a team member and there's around how well they produce something and their level of communication and contact, then it's necessary. But what we can do is to create space in our own experience that isn't spoken about, but when someone turns to talk to you, they have the sensation of, this person's really here. They're listening.
Yes.
There's room for a dialogue back and forth rather than just a head full of something they want to say to you or a busyness about something that needs to happen. So what you say is really honest, and I agree with you that it's often we don't want to slow down. And here's the paradox of it is, I work with a lot of clients and high-performing people around the world that have achieved a certain level of success that is they don't need to achieve anymore other than for their own sense of desire. And so they've achieved the currency, the things that they would like, the projects, and yet if they don't develop this thing we're talking about, their relationships, their well-being with their own body, and ultimately the as businesses evolve, as we are talking about here, their team will suffer that too if they're not present and they're not allowing some space in their life to actually take an exhale once you've completed a project. So you've attained the goal. We all love that. That sensation is fantastic. Like, yes, let's go. But the workplace, and I would say the Western world in general, is built under a model that is not sustainable. It's start, finish, start again, start, finish, start again. There's no time to rest. There's no time to exhale and to actually then to really examine how you did in whatever you were reaching for. Is there any adjustments to be made? Do I need to take a few hours off or a few days off before I start the next project? It's no, start, finish. And one of the wisdoms of the cycles, if I may, I'll just say this one last piece here, is there's something called the creation cycle. And it's in traditional Chinese medicine. It has a lot of wisdom. And basically what it's saying is that all things move in a cycle. The seasons, first and foremost, in Denmark here, you see that very well. The springtime, the seed is ready, and that's wood, and it wants to grow. It's the beginning of a project. It's the vision. We're talking about it, like we're excited. Nothing's happened yet. And then the wood goes into fire, which is summertime. It's expression. It's going towards the thing that you're talking about. It's going full power. It's courageous. It's risk. You're risking something. You don't know what's going to happen. It's exciting. And that's where we're stuck. We're stuck in fire. A healthy culture and a mature person, after they've reached fully, what happens? The fruit starts to ripen. We reach towards fall, which is, we reach towards earth, which is a grounding into personal well-being, community, into building trusting relationships. And there's a relaxation. Then it goes even further into autumn, which is a letting go. That's when the leaves fall off, and that's where you've finished a project and you just sit back down in your chair, or you take a day off and you go, that was good, or, oh, I could have error corrected in this way. So it's being very honest and becoming accountable with how you're living. And then the final part is winter, which is water, and that's just letting go. It's surrender. And our cultures want nothing to do with winter. There's very little respect and honor for it. But if you think about it, you need to let go fully. And then spring comes again, and it's ready to burst with a new idea. And so this could take one day, it could take 1 week, it could take a month. So that cycle happens throughout a time. And it's good for us to realize that we honor each part of the cycle.
I think when it comes to, because we're thinking like, how do you make change happen? How might transformation take place? And when I was coming into this conversation thinking about, okay, let's talk about presence. And, I thought we might talk about, okay, which ways to settle ourselves in the way that we're sitting together, talking together. But what's interesting is you're speaking more to the time outside of when we're meeting, outside of the time that we're in conversation, and giving space to that, I guess, so that then you can come bringing space into my being in this conversation as well. So that's interesting, I think.
Yeah, they're both happening simultaneously. There is this conversation right here. This is part of a conversation of a larger, of your family, of me traveling here, of our larger lives. And so they're both happening. And how I would like to respond to that is I look at it often like people speak about music and notes and silence. And as you become more masterful at something, you're not just hitting the notes, you're listening to the silence. You listen to Philip Glass or some of these great composers, they talk a lot about the silence between the notes. Similarly with conversation, what is the silence between words, and what is the silent conversations that's happening between us when no one's speaking? The silent conversation with our own breath, with the air against our skin, with the way that we're inhabiting the room that we're in. And that's the whole kind of the under earthiness of a conversation that we don't have time to really think about much, but it's there. And it is what builds the foundation for a healthy, strong, exciting, dynamic conversation, is someone that knows that side and they haven't avoided it their whole life, but they've actually spent at least a little bit of time there.
And if you go into a conversation and you're actually able to, manifest that level of presence, that you're fully there with your body, with your mind, with your intention, with everything you've got, your sensitivity for the other person also grows. You're simply like multiplying your own sensitivity as to what is going on really. And that means that you get a granularity in the conversation that you wouldn't have access to otherwise. We had David White. I think he put it in a great way that inspired me. He said, "There's a difference between being with and speaking to, like this sense of like that we're creating something together, which is different than just exchanging views, and listening to and listening with." I think he put it this way. And listening with is acknowledging the fact that if we're really good, we're creating something together that wasn't here before, and none of us had access to it individually, but we manifested it together. And my own experience is that if I'm in a group of people and I'm able to manifest that consciousness from the get-go, then we are actually able to do things within an hour that was mind-blowing. And in other cases, not so much. So there is a kind of a language, a vocabulary around, and I think embodiment is very much the key word here. What's your view on that?
It takes a real trust and a conviction to walk into a meeting, and rather than just jumping into high gear, giving it a moment of silence or waiting for the other to speak, it takes a certain trust that it actually is more productive. And so you have to go through it enough times to realize when you do give space, and then it's more thriving, it's a stronger conversation. And yes, it is absolutely about the body on one level. There is the mental body. So that's the conversation we're having here. And then there's the physical body. I like to think of the physical body as a kind of antenna. We all have that image of an antenna that transmits and receives information. And the more that our physical body is open as an antenna, so our breath is open, our eyes, our hands, our jaw is relaxed, the more that we're able to both take in the information of the people we're talking to, but also whatever our gift, our purpose, whatever we're speaking about is transmitted through an open body rather than a contracted body. So that's a profound way of looking at it, is walking into a conversation. If I'm scrunched and I'm like protecting.
No invitation.
No invitation. There's no room.
No.
And you're not noticing all the subtle cues of your team that are actually there in front of you.
But you're also mentioning something that I think that touched me. You're talking about this moment of silence in the very beginning. And myself included, I find a lot of people are actually afraid, like really scared of silence. And for my own part, I'm scared of silence in the sense that I don't know where things go. So it's a way of taking control. And that's what I see very often in conversations, in meetings, that we rush into taking something somewhere really quick because it feels good as long as it moves. Whereas the stopping, the getting on the balcony, the allowing us to say, or ask, what is the conversation we should have? Let's take 30 seconds and just reflect upon, how do we want to show up? What's the conversation we really are yearning to have? And what would it take for us to do that? I mean, just contacting that is super courageous. I don't have the courage in most cases, but when I do, it most often works.
But I think, so there's different ways that you could do this, because there's, for example, in your case, in many cases, you might have some power in the room, or some of your peers might have more power than, let's say, people who might be my colleagues. They, there's different ways that you could choose to show up. And when you make that pause for us, so to speak, yes, I guess there's something also to do with the power in the room and what you allow the rest of us to do. I'm making it a little bit black and white, a little bit hierarchical here, but and then on the other hand, so you might choose to do that for us. If I'm just sitting here by myself and maybe I don't have so much power in that one situation, I could think about, okay, what is my body doing? I think that's such an interesting question that you make me think of when you talk about, am I scrunched up like a ball? Are my hands crossed across my body? Am I breathing deeply or very in a constricted way? That would be a way that I could also take power over the way I'm showing up all throughout a conversation and a meeting. So we're not without power. Yeah. And I wanted to ask, what does it mean, the word embodiment? Taking a step back.
It's a definition that I think people continue to bring in all kinds of ways, and the embodiment has entered the cultural in many different ways. It was not just a physical thing now. So embodiment is coming into companies, it's coming into health and well-being. So it's a working definition is that a person is conscious, and then that consciousness is brought into the body. So I am here, I'm aware, and I reach out and hand you something. I'm aware of my body moving towards you, and I'm giving you a gift of something. So embodiment is when we are in our physical body and we're aware of the physical body moving through space. I mean, I could go on with lots of different definitions, but I would suggest everyone figure out what it means, because we all are embodied. And that's the beautiful thing, is the body is the anchor. It's the only thing that we can depend on that is here now. You can't be somewhere else. So learning to find the contact points that bring you back to your embodiment, the touch of your hands on your legs, the sensation of air, the sensation of the clothing, the simple things that bring us back to, we're here, there's gravity. One of my teachers once said, if you forget your body, just jump up in the air. You plop, you come back down again. So gravity is always there, a force upon the body. And that reminds you that your body is here, which reminds you to be fully here and be present in your conversations. And I just want to return to what you were saying for a moment, Steve, that I think it's a beautiful vulnerability, what you're expressing, because it's true for all of us, is there's reasons why we don't slow down or why we don't want to be in the body. And that's a larger conversation, but the short of it is it's uncomfortable. And when we actually pause and just sit down, place our hands on our legs and sit there for 5 minutes, for 5 hours, however long you can afford, you're going to be forced to have a deeper conversation with yourself. And that's why we resist it, because there's a lot of built up history. There's discomfort in the body. We start to sense the tension that we've been walking around with, the tightness in our belly. All that feels terrible. So if we keep moving and doing and thinking, we avoid it only to a certain point. It's waiting for you. At some point, we have to turn towards it. And generally, it is it's something that's afforded to people that have chosen to evolve that. And often it's to people that are in high functioning roles that have seen that they're going to burn out. They've burnt really bright, they're very powerful, and they go, okay, what's my next level of growth? How do I do the same work I'm doing with a relaxed body so I don't burn out? Plus, I actually invite people into the conversation in a way. And so it does trickle down from the top, what you were saying. When people in roles of leadership, they're the ones that are saying, let's pause, or we just finished this project, let's take a day before we dive into this next one, or an hour, or whatever it is. That starts to trickle down, and people go, oh, that actually, it's not just for fun. It actually helps the whole productivity of the team work better, and we're a better working organism.
I like that idea about, as a leader, you have to be invitational, right? And otherwise there is no conversation, and everything happens through conversation. So that's a given. But you can actually think about, when you go into a meeting as a leader, where am I making invitation and where am I not making an invitation? And many of us will acknowledge that physically I might not make an invitation. There's a part of me guarding myself in the conversation physically, which also means that anyone I meet will match my guardedness. And therefore, we probably won't create any art. We might do something together, but it's not art.
Right. And let us create more art. I mean, we succeed in the areas we want to and must, but within that, let's be beautiful and artistic and develop a reverence for life, because it is precious. And I know that can sound like it's, woo-woo, but as we grow and we get older, some of us, we've lost things we've loved. We've seen things transition. And as we get older, then it's natural that a quality of true reverence grows, because you don't know how long you're going to be here. So my wish is people find that sooner than later, rather than letting age force them into it. Let's practice that capacity earlier on.
As we round towards the end of this conversation, I think two kind of thoughts that have come together through this this talk with you. The one is that, when you find it's getting really transactional in the everyday of meetings and the conversations we have, and you can feel that it's just firing, like, oh, I'm talking, and then you're talking, and then I'm talking. I think one of the things that I've learned from you is that notice your body, and that in itself is a way to invite presence in and to become more present. And then the second thing off the back of that is the idea that we need to bring a bit more space in. And we talked about silence, but in terms of making change happen, in terms of transforming organizations or teams or whatever it might be, to remind ourselves to put that cycle, part of the cycle in, where we need to take a deep breath, look back, and not just rush on with the next thing. I think it's something that at least I've heard many times, but this is a good reminder to remember to put space in.
And sometimes space is asking a beautiful question. And I think it's as basic as an idea about as the embodiment thing, but in many meetings that I sit in, there are simply no questions being asked. I mean, there's literally not a single curious, beautiful question in the whole repertoire of what happened in a meeting. So I think a very, very practical thing we could do is invite the silence and the consciousness in by asking beautiful questions that makes us pause and makes us reflect upon, okay, how do we show up and what do we want out of this meeting, really?
So as we close this conversation, we'd like to end with just a round on what is the thing that you will take to your next conversation, Steve will take, and I'll take to our next conversation based on this time that we've spent together.
I'll take the pause.
And I'll take an intentionality. So being even more intentional even if I do need to make a very short phone call, which is like, oh, I need to get this information, just do it with more awareness of what's going on in my body.
I'll take the presence that we're sharing together here as a gift to remind me to continue to stay here and to breathe deeper. And I just want to say that the breath, I am reminded in this conversation, is one of the single most important ways of deepening our conversation and deepening the relationship with ourself. It's ultimately our most intimate relationship with life is the way we breathe, the texture of it, the quality of it. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Likewise.